Picture this. It's 1814. The young American Republic is facing an existential crisis. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to investigate the shocking fall of Washington, D.C., not just as a dry sequence of dates, but as a thrilling investigation into human ego, political vengeance, and, incredibly, a literal act of nature that changed the course of a nation. How exactly does a burgeoning empire lose its own capital to an invading army, only to be saved by a freak weather event? Well, let's find out. Listen to this. George Robert Glegg, a British soldier who was actually standing right there in the chaos, described a truly apocalyptic scene. He wrote of roofs torn off and whisked into the air like sheets of paper. He saw heavy cannons physically tossed into the sky. And here's the crazy part. This absolute chaos wasn't a brilliant military counterattack by the Americans. It was the climax of a chaotic invasion that saw the young American capital burn to a literal shell. So to understand how we get to flying cannons and whisked roofs, we've got to rewind and look at the deeply flawed human forces that made this unimaginable disaster possible.
Part 1. The unthinkable threat.
You really have to ask, why was the United States Capitol so completely vulnerable? The answer lies in a fatal mixture of blinding overconfidence and a geopolitical thirst for revenge. On the American side, you have U.S. Secretary of War John Armstrong. Armstrong possessed a staggering level of hubris. He completely dismissed the idea that the British would attack Washington. He figured they'll target the wealthy, commercially vital port city of Baltimore instead. Because of this assumption, he actively blocked attempts to build defenses for the capital. Meanwhile, British Vice Admiral Alexander Cochrane wasn't looking for commercial wealth at all. He was looking for blood. Following the American burning of the Canadian capital of York, Cochrane operated with a highly focused, vengeful directive to deliver a complete drubbing and lay waste to American towns. So American leadership completely misread their enemy's psychology.
Which brings us to Part 2, Collapse at Bladensburg.
When the British Army, who were suddenly freed up after Napoleon's abdication in Europe, marched toward Washington, military reality violently clashed with America's political ineptitude right on the outskirts of the capital. And this failure cascaded with terrifying speed. At noon, 4,500 battle-hardened British troops attacked around 6,500 poorly trained American militia at a town called Bladensburg. Now, despite having superior numbers, the Americans were ill-equipped and poorly positioned. By 1:30 p.m., the American left flank just crumbled under the pressure of those seasoned British veterans. By 3 p.m., a full-blown, disastrous retreat began, which was later mockingly remembered as the Bladensburg Races. And by 8 p.m. that very same day, the British literally walked right into Washington, D.C., completely unopposed.
This defensive collapse was absolute, and it was largely due to one staggering failure of leadership. General William Winder, the man tasked with defending the city, had made absolutely zero contingency plans for a retreat. None. So when the defensive lines broke, the sheer lack of strategic planning turned what could have been an orderly tactical fallback into a panicked, chaotic rout. The psychology of pure fear took over, leaving the road to the capital wide open.
Part 3. A City in Flames.
Now, as the American political elites, including President James Madison, scrambled to flee for their lives, a pretty massive historical mystery unfolded inside the White House. We've all heard the famous story, right? As the British approach, First Lady Dolley Madison heroically saves the famous Gilbert Stuart portrait of George Washington. It's this foundational myth of American history. But when we actually investigate, a deeply compelling and largely untold truth comes to light about what really happened in the White House that day.
The true savior was a man named Paul Jennings. Jennings was an enslaved man working in the Madison White House. According to his own later memoirs, which, by the way, was the very first White House memoir ever published, it was Jennings, along with a doorkeeper named John Suzette and a gardener, who actually physically retrieved this ultimate symbol of the Republic. Astonishingly, this enslaved man who rescued the portrait of America's first president would later purchase his own freedom with the help of Senator Daniel Webster. It is just a profound paradox of American history.
Meanwhile, just outside those walls, the British commanders were actually split on their intentions. Rear Admiral George Cockburn wanted the total destruction of the city, but Major General Robert Ross was essentially a reluctant arsonist. He initially planned for an orderly surrender and actually wanted to spare the city. So, what changed his mind? Well, as Ross entered the city under a flag of truce, a treacherous shot from an American hiding in a private residence rang out, killing Ross's horse and 2 of his men. In an instant, human nature took over. All restraint just vanished, and the fateful order to burn the city was given.
The British completely unleashed their vengeance. Using torches and this highly combustible gunpowder paste, they methodically set the Capitol building, the President's house, the Treasury, and the War Office ablaze. Think about that. The most potent symbols of the young American empire were being reduced to ashes in a matter of hours. The psychological impact on the nation was fully expected to be devastating.
Part 4. The devastating storm.
But just as the city was facing total, absolute annihilation, nature itself decided to intervene. The skies darkened on August 25th, the day after the fires were lit, and a violent, massive thunderstorm tore directly through the burning center of Washington. Remember our soldier George Robert Gleig? He described the rain not as your typical shower, but as a mighty cataract. It was a deluge.
The sheer physical violence of this wind defies belief. A tornado spawned from the storm actually lifted at least 2 heavy military cannons completely into the air and dropped them yards away. I mean, these are massive cannons. Buildings that somehow hadn't been burned or unroofed, trees were uprooted, and British soldiers were literally crushed under falling chimneys and flying debris.
And when the dust finally settled, a stunning historical reality emerged. The number of British soldiers killed by the tornado's flying debris was actually higher than the number of British soldiers killed by the armed American resistance at Bladensburg. Just let that sink in for a second. This freak act of God killed more invaders than the American military did, and it completely derailed the British occupation.
The torrential rains successfully doused the flames that were threatening to completely collapse the Capitol and the White House. Confronted by the devastation of this massive storm, mounting casualties from the weather, and rumors of American militias regrouping, the British decided they'd had enough. They used the extreme confusion and chaos of the storm to abandon the city that very night, slipping away stealthily to their ships. In the end, they had occupied the Capitol for only 26 hours.
Part 5. Ashes, Myths, and Rebirth.
The physical destruction left behind not only a ruined city, but a highly fertile ground for myths, things that a lot of us still mistakenly believe today. So let's bust some of these right now, based on the actual historical evidence. You'll often hear that Dolley Madison cut the portrait out of its frame. False. Modern conservation shows it wasn't cut. The frame was just broken, and it was carried out on its stretched canvas by Paul Jennings. How about the White House getting its name from white paint used to cover up the scorch marks? Also false. The name actually predates the fire. And the idea that the British wanted to permanently occupy Washington? In reality, they always intended it as a quick, destructive raid to draw American troops away from Canada. And here is perhaps the most difficult, uncomfortable truth of all. After the British left, rampant looting of the city wasn't done by the enemy. It was carried out by American citizens taking advantage of the chaos. By clearing away these myths, we uncover the raw, complex reality of a deeply fractured society struggling to respond to a massive catastrophe.
In the aftermath, the U.S. government faced a monumental crisis. Congress actually debated abandoning Washington entirely and moving back to Philadelphia, but that proposal was defeated. They chose to stay and rebuild. And here's the fascinating twist. Instead of shattering the American experiment as the British had hoped, the burning of the Capitol acted as a powerful unifying catalyst for a politically divided nation. It forced the government to professionalize, it prompted a rapid modernization of the military infrastructure, and to manage the massive rebuilding effort, the Senate created its first permanent standing congressional committees, a system they still use today. Which leaves us with this final, provocative question. Did the young republic have to lose its capital to truly understand how to defend and govern itself? The events of 1814 show us that history is never just about what was destroyed, but what human beings are forced to rebuild from the ashes. It's a powerful testament to human resilience and the unintended consequences of war. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this investigation changed how you view this pivotal moment in history. Keep questioning the past, and I'll see you next time.